In the vast, wind-swept grasslands of what we now call Mongolia, a child was born who would one day change the world. The year was around 1162, a time when the land was not a unified nation but a patchwork of warring tribes. This baby boy was born into the Borjigin clan, a noble but not overly powerful family. His father was a minor chieftain named Yasuge, a respected warrior known for his bravery. His mother, Holun, was a woman of great strength and resilience, who had been captured by Yasuge from another tribe, the Merkits, while she was on her way to her own wedding. This act of abduction was common at the time, but it planted seeds of a bitter feud that would haunt the family for many years to come. Legend says that when the baby was born, he was clutching a blood clot in his right fist, the size of a knucklebone. In the traditional beliefs of the Steppe people, this was a powerful omen. It was seen as a sign that the child was destined for greatness, a sign that he would become a mighty warrior and a great leader. His parents named him Temujin, after a Tatar chieftain whom Yasuge had just defeated and captured in battle. Naming a child after a vanquished enemy was thought to capture the spirit and power of that foe, transferring it to the newborn. Little did they know how much power this small child would one day command, far beyond that of any single chieftain. Temujin's family was part of a nomadic culture that had thrived on the harsh steppes for centuries. Their lives were dictated by the seasons and the needs of their herds of sheep, goats and horses. They lived in portable, felt-covered tents called gurs, which could be packed up and moved to new pastures in a matter of hours. The world Temujin was born into was one of constant motion, where survival depended on one's ability to ride, to hunt, and to fight. It was a world of breathtaking beauty and extreme hardship, where the sky seemed endless and the horizon stretched forever in every direction, a fitting cradle for a man who would one day rule an empire of similar scale. The Borjigin clan, to which Temujin belonged, was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. They were a proud lineage, tracing their ancestry back to a mythical blue-gray wolf and a graceful doe, but their practical power was limited. Yasugai, as their leader, had managed to build a network of allies and command respect, but his position was precarious. In the brutal politics of the steppe, alliances were as shifting as the desert sands. A friend one day could be a deadly enemy the next. This was the volatile world that shaped Temujin from his very first breath, a world where strength, loyalty and cunning were the most valuable currencies a person could possess. The Mongolia of the 12th century was a chaotic and dangerous place. There was no central government, no king, and no law to unite the people. Instead, the land was home to numerous nomadic tribes and confederations, each constantly vying for power, resources, and territory. The most powerful groups were the Tatars in the east, the Merkits to the north, the Nomads in the west, and the Karites in the central heartland. These larger confederations often clashed in large-scale battles, but just as common was the constant, low-level warfare of raiding and skirmishing between smaller clans. It was a cycle of violence fueled by revenge, the theft of livestock, and the abduction of women. Life for the average person was defined by loyalty to their immediate family and clan. Trust did not extend far beyond this small circle. The concept of a Mongol identity did not yet exist. People identified themselves as Borjigin, Tatar, Merkit, or Karite. These tribes had different customs and often long histories of grievances against one another. The Tatars, for instance, were long-standing enemies of Temujin's clan, responsible for poisoning one of his ancestors. The Merkits, from whom his mother Holun was stolen, harbored a deep-seated hatred for his father, Yasugi. These old wounds festered, creating a landscape where violence could erupt at any moment. The environment itself was an unforgiving master. The Mongolian steppe is a land of extremes, with scorching summers and brutally cold winters where temperatures could plummet far below freezing. Survival depended on the health of the herds, which provided food, milk, clothing, and shelter. A harsh winter or a dry summer could decimate a clan's livestock, leading to starvation and desperation. This constant struggle against nature made the people tough, resilient, and resourceful. It also made them fiercely protective of their pastures and water sources, another major source of conflict between the tribes. There was no room for weakness in this world. In this fractured landscape, power was personal. A leader, or Khan, ruled not by divine right or inherited title, but by his ability to attract and hold followers. A strong Khan was one who could lead successful raids, distribute plunder fairly, and protect his people from their enemies. Loyalty was given to the man, not the position. If a leader showed weakness or failed his followers, they would simply abandon him and join a more successful rival. This system created charismatic and capable warlords but also ensured that the political situation remained permanently unstable. It was into this crucible of chaos that Temujin was born, a world waiting for someone strong enough to forge it into something new. Growing up on the steppe, Temujin learned the essential skills of a nomad from a very young age. Like all Mongol boys, he was on horseback almost as soon as he could walk. The horse was central to their way of life, used for travel, hunting, warfare, and herding. Young Temujin became an expert rider, able to gallop across the plains and fire a bow and arrow with deadly accuracy from the saddle. He learned to hunt, not just for sport, but for survival, tracking animals and contributing to the family's food supply. These early experiences taught him patience, strategy, and a deep understanding of the natural world. Lessons that would serve him well in his later life as a military commander. Temujin was not alone in his childhood adventures. He had several brothers, Kasar, Kachiun, and Temuge, and a sister, Temulin. He also had two half-brothers, Beter and Belgute, from his father's second wife. The relationships between these siblings were complex, a mixture of camaraderie and rivalry. But his most significant childhood relationship was with a boy from another clan named Jamuka. Temujin and Jamuka met as children and quickly became inseparable. They swore an oath of brotherhood, becoming Anda, a bond considered more sacred than that between biological brothers. They hunted together, wrestled, and shared their deepest secrets, promising to remain loyal to each other for life. This friendship with Jamuka was a source of great joy and strength for the young Temujin. It gave him a connection beyond his immediate family, an ally in the complicated world of tribal politics. They exchanged gifts, a traditional part of the Anda ceremony. Temujin gave Jamuka an arrow with a cypress wood tip, and Jamuka gave Temujin an arrow with a calf bone tip. They played games together by the Onan River, dreaming of their futures as great warriors. Their bond seemed unbreakable, a perfect alliance of two promising young leaders. No one could have predicted that this deep friendship would one day sour into the most bitter and consequential rivalry of their time. However, even as a child, Temujin showed signs of a steely determination that set him apart. He was thoughtful and intense, with a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through people. He had a natural charisma that drew others to him, but also a fierce pride and a powerful will. He was afraid of dogs, a common fear on the steppe where large guard dogs were ferocious, but he learned to master his fear. This inner toughness was being forged daily by the challenges of his environment. He was learning not just how to survive, but how to lead, how to inspire loyalty, and how to command respect, even as a young boy playing on the riverbank. The turning point in Temujin's young life came when he was just 9 years old. Following tradition, his father Yesuge took him to find a suitable bride from another tribe. This was not about love, but about forging a crucial political alliance. They traveled to the clan of his mother Holun, where he was betrothed to a young girl named Borte. Borte was slightly older than Temujin, and she was from the prestigious Ongirat tribe. As part of the arrangement, Temujin was to live with Borte's family for several years to get to know them and their customs. This was a common practice designed to strengthen the bonds between the two families before the marriage was finalized. On his journey home, leaving his son behind, Yesuge stumbled upon a camp of Tatars, the very tribe he had long fought against. The Tatars were celebrating a feast, and following the customs of steppe hospitality, they invited him to join them. Though he knew the danger, refusing the invitation would have been a grave insult. Yesuge shared their food and drink, but the Tatars had recognized him as their old enemy. They secretly poisoned his food. Yesuge felt the poison working as he rode away. He managed to struggle back to his own camp, but it was too late. He died shortly after, leaving his family leaderless and vulnerable. The death of a Khan was a moment of extreme peril for his clan. Yesuge's followers had been loyal to him personally, not to his 9-year-old son. Seeing no advantage in staying with a widow and her young children, the clan's other families made a swift and brutal decision. Led by the Taichiud clan, who were distant relatives, they decided to abandon Holun and her children. They packed up their gurs, gathered their herds, and simply rode away, leaving the grieving family with almost nothing. Holun pleaded with them, reminding them of their loyalty to her husband, but they ignored her cries. For them, a woman and her small children were a burden, not an asset. In a single stroke, Temujin's world was shattered. He went from being the son of a respected chieftain, betrothed to a girl from a powerful family, to a destitute outcast. His family, now consisting of his mother, his siblings, and his two half-brothers, was left to fend for themselves in the harsh wilderness. They had no herd to provide milk or meat, and no warriors to protect them. They were forced to survive by foraging for wild roots, berries, and whatever small game they could catch. This brutal betrayal taught Temujin a lifelong lesson about the fickle nature of power and loyalty. It was a lesson in bitterness and survival that would fuel his ambition for the rest of his life. The years that followed his father's death were a relentless struggle for survival. Holen proved to be a woman of incredible fortitude, teaching her children how to live off the land. They learned to fish in the Onan River, to trap small marmots and mice, and to dig for edible roots. It was, honestly, a humiliating and difficult existence, a far cry from their previous life. The constant hunger and poverty created tension within the family. Temujin, as the eldest son, felt the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. He began to clash with his older half-brother Bader, who, by tradition, had some claim to leadership, and even to taking Holen as his wife when he came of age. This rivalry came to a tragic head. One day, Temujin and his brother Kasar were hunting when Bader stole a fish they had caught. Later, Bader stole a lark they had shot. For Temujin, this was not just about food, it was a challenge to his authority and a threat to the family's fragile unity under his leadership. Fed up with Bader's selfishness, Temujin and Kasar ambushed and killed him with their arrows. When they returned, their mother Holen was furious, not just at the murder, but at what it represented, a family turning on itself in its darkest hour. She scolded her sons for their rash and destructive act, warning them that with no allies they could not afford to have enemies within their own home. Their struggles were not over. The Taichud clan, who had abandoned them, saw the growing Temujin as a future threat. They feared he might one day seek revenge for their betrayal, so they sent a raiding party to eliminate him. They ambushed the family's small camp, and while the others scattered, Temujin was captured. He was forced to wear a wooden collar, a heavy kang that locked his hands and neck, humiliating him and rendering him helpless. For a proud Mongol, this was a fate worse than death. He was paraded as a prisoner and treated like an animal, a public display of the Taichud's power over the remnants of Yasugei's family. But even in this desperate situation, Temujin's will to survive did not break. He watched and waited for his chance. During a feast held by his captors, he saw an opportunity. When his guard was distracted, Temujin used his wooden collar as a weapon, knocking the guard down and fled into the night. He hid in the nearby Onan River, submerging himself with only his nose above the water to breathe. A sympathetic man from a subservient clan, Sorgan Shira, spotted him, but pretended not to see him. Later that night, Sorgan Shira found Temujin and helped him, hiding him in a cart of wool and helping him to finally escape. This act of kindness from a stranger showed Temujin that loyalty could be found in the most unexpected places. After his daring escape, Temujin was a wanted man, but he was also free. He spent years as a fugitive, slowly gathering his family back together. During this time, he never forgot about Borte, the girl to whom he had been betrothed so many years ago. When he felt he was in a stable enough position, he journeyed back to the Ongirat tribe to claim his bride. Borte's family had heard of his family's misfortunes, but they honored the promise made to Yasugei. They welcomed Temujin, and the marriage went ahead. Borte's mother gave her a valuable wedding present, a magnificent cloak made of black sable fur, a symbol of great wealth and prestige. The marriage to Borte brought Temujin not just a wife he would come to love deeply, but also a renewed sense of status. The alliance with the powerful Ongirat tribe gave him a legitimacy he had lacked since his father's death. The sable cloak was more than just a beautiful garment, it was a political asset. Temujin, with his characteristic strategic thinking, knew exactly what to do with it. He decided not to keep it, but to give it away as a gift. He traveled to the most powerful leader in the region, Togrul Khan of the Karait tribe, a man who had been into his own father, Yasugei. Presenting the sable cloak to Togrul was a masterful move. It was a gift so valuable that it could not be ignored. By giving it to the powerful Khan, Temujin was doing several things at once. He was reminding Togrul of the old alliance he had with Yasugei, effectively saying, "I am my father's son." He was also placing himself under Togrul's protection, acknowledging the Khan's superior position, while simultaneously demonstrating his own worth and resourcefulness. Togrul was impressed. He accepted the gift and in return promised to help Temujin gather his father's scattered people, and declared him his protege. For the first time, Temujin had a powerful patron. Just as his fortunes seemed to be turning, disaster struck again. The old feud with the Merkit tribe, the people from whom his mother had been stolen, came back to haunt him. Seeking revenge for an act committed a generation earlier, the Merkits launched a surprise raid on Temujin's small camp. Temujin and his family managed to escape on horseback, but in the chaos, his new wife Borte was left behind and captured. It was a devastating blow, a personal humiliation, and a direct echo of his own mother's story. His wife had been taken by the same tribe that had taken his mother. Temujin was powerless to rescue her on his own. He had the will but not the warriors. Faced with the capture of his wife, Temujin was overwhelmed with grief and rage, but he did not despair. Instead, he turned his anger into action. He knew he could not defeat the Merkits alone, so he went to the two most powerful allies he had in the world. First, he went to Togrul Khan, the Kharat leader to whom he had recently sworn allegiance. He reminded Togrul of his promise of protection, and begged for his help in rescuing Borte. Moved by the young man's plight and bound by his word, Togrul agreed to raise an army. He saw this as an opportunity to assert his own power and gain plunder from the Merkits, but he was also fulfilling his duty to his new vassal. Next, Temujin sought out his childhood, Jamuka. Jamuka had by now become a powerful leader in his own right, commanding a large following of warriors. Temujin went to him and explained what had happened, appealing to their sacred bond of sworn brotherhood. Jamuka was quick to offer his support. He was outraged at the insult to his, and eagerly agreed to join the campaign. He mobilized his own forces, and together the two friends planned their attack. For a brief moment, their childhood dream of fighting side by side as great warriors was coming true. The combined army of Togrul, Jamuka, and Temujin's small band of followers was a formidable force. The allied army, numbering in the thousands, swept down on the unsuspecting Merkit encampment. The attack was swift and brutal. The Merkits, caught completely by surprise, were scattered and defeated. In the chaos of the battle, Temujin desperately searched for Borte. He rode through the camp calling her name. Hearing his voice, Borte emerged from a cart where she had been hidden. Their reunion was emotional and dramatic. Borte was safe, and Temujin had not only rescued his wife, but had also avenged the old dishonor done to his mother. He had proven that he was a man who would stop at nothing to protect his family. The victory over the Merkits was a major triumph. It was Temujin's first significant military campaign, and its success dramatically increased his reputation. Warriors who witnessed his courage and determination were drawn to his side. The plunder from the Merkit camp, including horses and goods, provided his followers with much-needed wealth. But most importantly, the rescue of Borte cemented his status as a worthy leader. He had successfully called upon powerful allies, led a victorious campaign, and reclaimed what was his. He was no longer just the forgotten son of a minor chieftain, he was a rising star on the Mongolian steppe. After the successful rescue of Borte, Temujin and Jamuka decided to camp together, combining their followers into one large group. For a time their old friendship flourished. They were once again the inseparable of their youth, sharing a blanket at night and leading their people as one. They hunted together and feasted together, and their combined strength made them a powerful force on the steppe. Many people believed that this alliance between the two charismatic leaders would last forever, and that they would rule together. But beneath the surface of their friendship, differences in their leadership styles and philosophies began to emerge, creating a rift that would eventually tear them apart. Jamuka was an aristocrat at heart. He believed in the traditional tribal structure, where power belonged to the established, noble families. He appointed his relatives and fellow aristocrats to positions of command, maintaining a strict hierarchical system. Temujin, on the other hand, had a radically different approach. Shaped by his years of hardship and his experience with betrayal, he valued loyalty and ability above all else. He promoted men based on their skill and merit, regardless of their clan or social standing. Men who had once been his enemies, or who came from humble backgrounds, could rise to high positions if they proved themselves worthy. This merit-based system was revolutionary and attracted many common people to his banner. The contrast in their methods created a natural division within their joint camp. The traditional nobles and aristocrats gravitated towards Jamuka, while the more ambitious, the outcasts, and those from lower status clans were drawn to Temujin's promise of opportunity. The tension came to a head one day when Jamuka made a cryptic comment. He suggested that they should camp separately, with him taking the more valuable pastures for the horses, and Temujin taking the less desirable land for the sheep and goats. Temujin's wife, Borte, a wise and perceptive woman, understood the hidden meaning immediately. It was a subtle assertion of dominance, a sign that Jamuka saw himself as the senior partner. Realizing that their alliance was no longer one of equals, Temujin made a fateful decision. During the night, without telling Jamuka, he and his followers packed up their camp and quietly slipped away. It was a clear break. As they traveled, many of Jamuka's own followers, inspired by Temujin's leadership style, deserted their old master and joined Temujin's group. This act of betrayal infuriated Jamuka. He saw Temujin not just as a political rival but as a traitor who had broken their sacred oath of brotherhood. The deep love they once shared curdled into an equally deep hatred. The stage was now set for a long and bitter conflict between the two former friends. The split with Jamuka marked the beginning of a new phase in Temujin's life. He was now an independent leader with a growing number of loyal followers. In 1189, his supporters, a diverse collection of clans and families who believed in his vision, held a great assembly, at this assembly, they formally elected him as their Khan. It was a pivotal moment. He was no longer just the leader of the small Borjigin clan, but the chosen Khan of a new and powerful coalition. It was at this point that he began to be known by a new title, though the famous one, Genghis Khan, would come later. This election was a direct challenge to the established powers, especially Jamuka. Jamuka could not let this challenge go unanswered. The rivalry between the two men escalated from a personal feud into an open war. In 1190, Jamuka gathered a massive army of over 30,000 men from various tribes loyal to him and marched against Temujin. The two forces met at the Battle of Dalan Baljut. Temujin was outnumbered, and his forces were defeated. He and his followers were forced to retreat. To make an example of the defeated, Jamuka committed an act of extreme cruelty. He boiled 70 of the captured enemy chieftains alive in cauldrons. This horrific act was meant to terrorize his enemies into submission, but it had the opposite effect. Jamuka's brutality disgusted many of his own allies and neutral observers. It highlighted the stark difference between the two leaders. While Jamuka ruled through fear and aristocratic privilege, Temujin was seen as a more just and modern leader who rewarded loyalty and punished betrayal, but did not engage in such pointless cruelty against his own people. Instead of breaking Temujin's support, Jamuka's actions drove more people to his rival's side. They saw Temujin as a leader who, despite his defeat, offered a better future, one based on merit and unity rather than on terror and old tribal divisions. The defeat was a military setback, but a political victory. This first major conflict set the pattern for the next decade. The Mongolian steppe became a chessboard for the two great rivals, Temujin and Jamuka, with other leaders like Togrul Khan often shifting their allegiances between them. Temujin spent these years consolidating his power, reforming his army, and slowly winning over more clans through a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and decisive battles. He was no longer just surviving, he was actively pursuing a great ambition. He was beginning the monumental task of uniting all the warring tribes of Mongolia under a single banner, his banner. The boy who was born clutching a blood clot was now taking his first steps towards forging an empire.